So today,
Let's do it.
sorry if I look down all the time. I'm like sitting really weird right now, but anyway, today we are going to be talking about composition and we are going to kind of breeze through definitions because I feel like this is more of an intuitive thing and it's not really down to like a science. We're going to look at like grids and stuff like that, but you don't have to follow them to a T. They're just there to help. So the basic definition is an arrangement of elements within a work of art. So this applies to like everything too. Like this can be music, like writing, anything you could think of. It's just how you arrange everything in the piece. So like if we moved this rock somewhere else, we're changing the composition. Or if we add another one or take it away, like that kind of thing. I like to think of it as like the foundation to your piece. So if you have a really good foundation, then your painting can stand on its own without like crazy rendering. Like you don't have to have meticulous detail or like perfect painting skills. If you have a good foundation, your painting will still stand on its own. So just to show you like a couple different composition types, this is Edgar Payne, who we've looked at his paintings for the color studies before, and I think I have another one in here. This is from his book about landscape compositions, but you can kind of still apply these to like anything. They're just kind of like basic composition setups. So these are his 15 compositional archetypes. So this one is like, we're not going to go through all of them. I'm just showing you, but this is like counterbalance and like things like that. You'll see this one a lot. This is a really popular one, and the L-shaped one, and this one. You will see these everywhere if you look at landscape paintings. It's kind of crazy. We all have probably seen this. The golden spiral or like the golden ratio. This is super complicated, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. But this is basically just a mathematical ratio that you can use to like break up your composition. Basically, the like simplest way to think about it is big, medium, and small. So like this is your section of big things, this is medium things, and then small things. And basically that's what this does, is it's like a balance between large, medium, and small. And we'll kind of get into that in this example. So like this is an old piece. But basically, if we take things and we start to make them all the same size, like if we make this bigger, oops. If we make this super big, to where it's basically the same as this, and then we make the wolf bigger, we start to lose our sense of balance and scale, and we can't tell how far away or close things are because everything is like basically the same size. That's like generally the way the golden spiral works. If you want to get more into it, you can do like research on it. Really, I think it's too complicated and it doesn't really help me that much, so I don't spend a lot of time using it. And then another thing with like contrast, like that was like size contrast. So you want to make sure you have variety between the size of your elements, but then it also works for values. So you can see here in this painting, that's also really old, your eye is naturally drawn here, oops, because it's the area with the highest contrast. Since the wolf is so dark, you immediately want to look this way and follow it into the canvas. But if we change that and we make it like the same color as everything else, or I guess the same value, not the same color, you kind of lose that. And then when you zoom out, it just looks like a piece of the bushes. And then the same can be said for like the opposite. If we make these darker, ew, that was weird. Then you kind of don't know where to look. Like we're looking here probably and like at all these little dark spots instead of following through the canvas. We're kind of just looking all over, which you don't want. And this kind of follows the L-shaped archetype too. Because all of these you can use together. Like it's not like you have to pick one archetype or like one grid and you can only follow that. These are all like meant to be used in tandem, and we're like thinking about all these elements at the same time. We all probably know this one. This is the rule of thirds. It's very simple. It's basically breaking up the canvas into 9 squares. And then these little points are like where you want your areas of focus to be. This is like the best one. Like if you ever do film studies or like really any kind of study, almost everything can be broken down or like uses the rule of thirds. And once you start to notice it, you'll see it everywhere. It's really weird. So then like for this one, this is also an old, sorry, I used a lot of old paintings for this because I feel like instead of actually painting something, it's easier to show with things you already have and like move elements around. So this is a painting I have, and if we put the rule of thirds, or if we break it up into thirds, you can tell that nothing is really hitting any of these points, and everything is just in the middle. So it makes it a really kind of boring picture to look at, even though it's like has pretty rendering and like all these details. It's just kind of stale looking. So then if we start moving things around based on our thirds, we can like slide this over here and like slide these over, maybe somewhere like over here. And already it's just like more interesting. And if you wanted, you could push it even further, but like if you wanted to put them directly on the points. Right? So you automatically have something that like already looks interesting and you're like, sorry, 300 layers. Your eye kind of moves throughout the canvas, which is what you want. Like you don't want to like lead people out of it and then like have random things coming all around. So it's like that kind of principle. Pretty basic, pretty easy. And then these are just more examples of contrast. I forgot to move this. It was supposed to be back by the other ones. But basically, when you think about contrast, I use this all the time in my work. This is my favorite way to separate like elements and make it more interesting. So like these, oops, are just a bunch of old pieces. But you automatically always look at all of the spots where it's super bright. Never finished this one, but it's a good example. So if we took these and we like changed the values in any way to make them more similar, it's like automatically super boring. Like, wow, that sucks. Like, it's just super boring now. And you always want your composition to be interesting and have like contrast because that's what creates tension and makes you want to look around and like look into the image further. So then this, you might not have seen this, but this is like my favorite grid. This is called dynamic symmetry, and it's basically the rule of thirds, but on like steroids. So you can see the thirds lines here, and then it just continues to break it down with like diagonals everywhere. And that's basically what it is. It's the rule of thirds, but it adds diagonals and vertical lines. So the way I learned to use this is by looking at master studies. This is Van Gogh. So when you look at this, you can tell that he's placing things like following, like this follows this vertical or diagonal, sorry. Everything is kind of by this like dividing line, the middle line, just slightly under it. And like you can tell that these are placed here. So it has a very diagonal composition. This one is such a good example. The first one is kind of like, eh, but like it still works. Like you can tell here that this follows this diamond sort of composition. All of the rocks are on the outskirts or these like outer triangles here. And then we have a lot of breathing room in the middle, which is good. You should always have like you need to give your viewers somewhere to rest on the canvas or they'll be overwhelmed and there will be too many things to look at. Same here. A lot of these are the diamond one. I didn't mean to do that. Oops. All of like the elements are placed like in within this diamond. Even like these shadows and these bushes down here are like almost perfectly on that diagonal. And same here. So it's just like a nice overlay. Like sometimes when I'm working on something and I'm like, this looks really weird, I'll lay this grid on top and I'll maybe turn it to like 50% opacity. And then I'll think about like, what can I move around? Like this is like right on this third, which is nice. Beautiful little thirds here. And then we have this nice chunk of like breathing room. So a lot of this composition is like this section heavy. But yeah, this is a good exercise. If you are like scared of these grids, which I was at first, a good exercise is to find a bunch of master paintings and then overlay it and like analyze where they're putting things on the canvas and like how they fall. So now, since this is the longest part, we're gonna get right to the demo. I have this little thing set up and we are going to basically take this and lay out the basic elements, and then we're going to see what we can do to change it to make it more interesting. Because right now, if we look at this, everything is just kind of in the middle. Like it's kind of boring. So we're going to make it better. But before we do that, we just want to lay it in so that we can manipulate everything. The loudest car just went by. That was really weird. I don't know if my microphone picked it up. So I'm going to start this in like grayscale. And then we'll move to color because it's kind of like a notan study, which if you don't remember, that's like a two value study. So if you want an easy way to like think about that, you can take your curves and like manipulate it like crazy. And you'll see like the basic two value structure. So we're just gonna, we're just gonna get into it. And I'm gonna keep it really loose, like it doesn't have to be super clean, but I do want to keep all of my elements separate so that I can move them around later. Like I'll probably separate this ground plane and then the rocks, but probably separate. And we can turn this off now. This is basically a thumbnail, but I'm just painting it bigger. So when you're like thinking about composition studies or like planning out compositions, you don't want them to be super crazy detailed because things will probably change and move around. Actually, we're just gonna leave that, and this will be our water. Does anyone have any questions? We kind of breezed through all the grids. While I'm painting, you guys can ask questions, and I will answer them. And if you're confused about my color jitter, I just like to have it because when you go from grayscale to color, I feel like it makes it so much better. And I like the texture it adds, which is our next lesson. That will be a fun one. And then usually I work on all like one layer, but for this, we're gonna make multiple layers and kind of jump between them. So I don't want to have to like cut them out and move everything around and it will look really weird. So we're gonna have this rock here be its own chunk. And then we're gonna have this one also be its own thing. And you can kind of see how messy it is. Like, since we're going to move things around and this isn't like a final painting, we can keep it messy because we don't want to get lost in all the details too soon. I'm just going to fix the ground and then we'll start moving things around. Mine looks so dark, but we're not really worried about the values. Maybe we can tweak it a little bit. Never mind. Here's one of the clouds. Yeah, we're gonna make these darker so they stand out more. There we go. So we have all of our pieces. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna put our grid on, and mine is at 50% just because I'm gonna make it lower actually. So that I can see it still, but I can also see all of my other things. So it's not too strong. So like immediately, I want to move this like somewhere over here. And then either I want to make this bigger, so it kind of so that we're kind of following this diagonal. And then this one kind of follows this one. So now we have like a V shape happening. And then what I'm going to do is I think I'm going to continue the diagonal moment and I'm going to make this beach water kind of less straight. Crazy color jitter. And you can tell when I'm doing it, it doesn't have to follow the like exact curves perfectly. It's just like generally that's where they're falling. So now I'm thinking that these kind of blend in. So I'm gonna start painting in more values so that we have a little more contrast. Oh my gosh, hi Zodiac. It's such a cute little GIF. And then I think I'm gonna change the shape of this rock. Just be a little wider. So that it kind of goes into this little diamond. And then I don't like how our horizon line is so close to the middle. So I think I'm gonna bring it down. I'm not really sure yet. We'll try it and see what happens. Let me fill this back in. Yikes. Now let's just look at it. A lot of this, in my opinion, is like very intuitive, and I have to just like look at it and step back and see if I like it. And I think I do, but I'm not 100% sure yet. I think because it's so messy still, it's gonna be like harder to tell. But like generally, this is how I approach it. Like I make little thumbnails. Like I'd probably do like I'll show you later. I have like this is like more of an example heavy lesson than like an actual painting like demo lesson. Because it's kind of hard to just like show a composition and like paint at the same time. It would take me all day if I like painted out 500 examples. So yeah, this I think is where I would leave it. Like if we wanted to do something different, we can maybe try. What else could we try? We could bring the horizon line up, but I think that will look really bad. Generally, as a rule of thumb, you don't want your horizon line to be like dead center, but sometimes if it's too high, it looks weird. Okay, maybe it's not as bad as I thought. Oops. Right, so now we just have more of the ground playing. But then this is a little boring because now you have all of this like dead space in the middle. Like, I want to be pink. All of this is like all empty space, and all of your visual interest is in this like tiny little corner. Usually the opposite is better, like more dead space at the top. Just kind of feels more natural. And that's kind of how working on compositions goes. Like you'll get a feel. You have to kind of trust your gut. Like you can tell when something looks weird. How's the chat doing? Yeah, exactly. If we had the other one where it was like more high up, then you need something at the bottom to kind of balance out the empty space, which is another huge thing. It's just like making sure everything is sort of balanced, which is why the grids help if you're struggling because you get a better like sense of like how you can place things. Oh yeah, you do see the big to small. Yeah, we have our big, medium, small. In fact, if we wanted to push it more, we could make this one even bigger. And then we can take this and make it like tiny. And now we have like a nice, see, this is kind of shows like how easy it is to just like change things and move them around and how like big of a difference it makes. Now we have like a nice diagonal composition. Everything is kind of like leading you either up or down depending on where you look at it. And I bet we could do the opposite too. Let's try it just for fun. Like if we make this really small. And then we make this one huge. It's kind of like the same thing, but opposite. But then if we make them both tiny, you run into that same issue where we don't know which one of these is in the front or the back or how like big they are in relation to each other. I liked this one. I like how big this one looks. It's kind of fun. reminded you of the pyramids. That's really funny. I mean, there's a lot of triangles. We looked at a lot of triangles today. We're just going to do a little more rendering and then we'll start to bring it into color. And then we can talk about things like how light creates like compositional contrast and things like that. And like mood. Like if you think about like something that's super blue, your composition might feel a little uneasy. Or if you have like really dramatic shadows, it's going to feel really tense or like intense too. And then this all goes into like kind of storytelling with your elements. Oops. I feel so rusty. I haven't like painted anything in a really long time. And then I was just now getting back into it this week. I was painting fish, which if you follow me on Twitter, that's the huge. And we're still keeping this really messy. Oh my god, this is what I mean. Do you see these layers? I keep accidentally painting everything. I am so used to working on the same layer. We're gonna combine it down since I don't think we're gonna move too much around, and if we do, I'll just paint over it. Because like I was already thinking about moving these clouds. If you're a layers person, you will have a great time with these types of like exercises. Like where you just like have pieces of things and you move them around. I'm so bad at it because I always squish everything into one layer. And I think since we moved this down, I'm just gonna make it a little more straight. Since we have such crazy mountains, I don't think we need that crazy of water. And I really like this little piece right here where it's kind of lighter, so I don't want to lose that, but it is going to be smaller. I was just painting like a beach scene like this for a warm up earlier, and like this like part of the sand where it's kind of wet, but it kind of isn't, was killing me. You guys have anything you like struggle with compositions? Maybe we can talk about it too. Or like anything that you think is confusing. Because I know when I first started learning it, I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, if it looks good, it looks good. Especially with the grids. It took me like so long to like understand what was happening and what I was supposed to do with them. Or like how they worked. Well, we're gonna add a little texture. but just a smidge so that they look more like rocks.
I think often, excuse me, often the issue with composition, I mean, certainly mostly for a lot of the creators, I think, is down to because what we're doing right now is pretty much it's basically painting, but it's also environmental. It's
Yeah, it's kind of just
basically
like a mini
landscape painting
exercise.
versus having to apply this kind of theory into a practical thing, like when you're making a comic or a manga, and like you're working on your paneling. I think the paneling is not gonna vary too much, but like certainly the composition of characters and things within the paneling uh, tends to be a challenge sometimes. Um,
Yeah.
like where do you put the characters? Where do you put any kind of things that are important for that scene, and then also where you put the speech bubbles as well tends to be like a fairly hard exercise. I obviously not nothing against anyone that does painting and landscapes and stuff like that, but when it comes down to like keeping each panel interesting, whether it's a you know a comic that you read right left to right, or a manga that you read right to left, or a webtoon that you read vertically, I think within those still like paneling is quite a big it's quite a challenge. I think certainly like webtoons that you read top to bottom um, and have quite a bit of space, and you can like it's not as convoluted as a manga where like all the panels are fairly close to each other. Like webtoons have like a lot of white space,
Yeah.
and so you can kind of put some of the text and some of the speech bubbles outside of like the actual panel where your characters are, and it tends to be a little bit easier that way. But it's still, I think there's a very not thin line as in like a very thick line of what separates like good or normal paneling from great panels. And I think yeah, it's kind of probably where we struggle the most. I say we because even when I was working on Umidachi, which is on hiatus by the way for anyone that doesn't know, um, even when I was working Umidachi, it was fairly hard to come up with where's the character, where are they looking at, like is there any other characters in that panel or scene, and where you put the speech bubbles as well, so like you do not obfuscate the characters while still keeping it dynamic and interesting and like
And like
getting yeah readable and
yeah,
making sure
like
like
clear.
if people went through it, yeah, if users and readers went through the panel, that they would at least they're probably going to focus on the speech first because that's generally what happens, and they kind of then look at the characters unless the characters are like very very big compared to the speech, as in if you do like a full page spread for example, or a double page spread for instance. um, but yeah, I think like composition in that sense it's really it's quite hard, and uh, many people tend to struggle into making like a great panel. Do you have any kind of thoughts or like how you would approach something like that, for instance?
Yeah, so obviously, I don't really make comics, so I can't give you, like, 100% definitive advice, but I did have to take a class on, like, paneling and making comics in school, and the biggest thing that we learned that in that class is to lay down your bubbles first so that you know how much space you have to work with. Because if you just start drawing things and then you're like, "Oh my god, I have to fit a bubble in here somewhere now," then it's gonna look way more crowded than if you started with the bubble and you already know how much room you have to work with. And also, don't be afraid to make more panels. Like if you are making a panel and you're like, I can't fit everything that I want to fit in here, just make it just separate them. It doesn't have to be all in one. Film studies and the rule of thirds will save you if you're struggling. Like if you study films, like a lot of them that have characters in them, oh man, let me do it. I'll draw on top of it. So a lot of like if you watch a lot of movies, you'll know. But a lot of films will have
Hmm.
characters on the third. So like if someone's talking to someone, they'll be here, and then the other person will be here on the thirds, right? And that is like
Right.
a clear panel. And then you can do the opposite too. Like you can have like someone really big on the side or whatever. And then another thing for paneling is like let me make a new thing for this. It's kind of like movie directing. If you are thinking about where your characters are, so if you have like one character here and another character here, thinking about your camera, this is the camera, will help. So like if you have a panel and it starts from the camera looking at the characters from this side, we'll make them different colors so it makes more sense. Make this one yellow. Right, so these are our two characters. So then if we have a panel from this angle, they're from the side, we're looking at them. Oh my god, that's so bad. Sorry, I do landscapes all the time. I haven't drawn people in like so long. Oh, good lord. Right, we have our people, they're looking at each other. From our point of view, this is the blue person. And then this is the other person. So what if you had a panel like this, and then you're going to the second panel and you want to change the shot, one thing to keep in mind that you don't want to do is moving the camera. I lost my pink
To the
color.
opposite side.
To the opposite side, yeah, because then you end up with a situation like this. Oops, sorry. I always forget this page view thing is so weird. Hold on. You end up with a situation like this, where like it looks like they just switch spots. Because now if our
Yeah.
camera's over here, this isn't dynamic. We don't really know what happened. It looked like they just are standing in each other's spot now, right? So you want to keep in mind the camera and like where you're placing it. Because if you put it anywhere else that isn't just like the opposite, like if we moved it
Mm.
here, then you don't run into that problem. Because now we're kind of, well, actually, let's move it back further. Like if we put it like here, now we're like looking over this dude's shoulder. So you kind of have what I drew earlier. Sorry, this is like so messy, but it gets the point across. Right? So now we have something more like this, where we're looking over this dude's shoulder, and then this dude's like back here.
Yeah, it's a bit more. You're looking at the back of blue versus the front of yellow, I guess.
Or like just having them switch spots. It's like that kind of thing. Like you always want to know where your camera is and think about it that
Mm.
way. Like I read somewhere that someone said it's kind of like stage directing or like in theater. So you want to think about like,
Yeah, very much so.
yeah, where
Yeah,
everything is
and
staged.
in fact, Fingy was saying just that just now. It's like
Oh,
a
really?
directing a movie. So
Pretty
yeah.
much, yeah. Like knowing where your camera is at like all times will be really helpful. I've seen people make like 3D models in The Sims and then just like take screenshots and like stage it that way. This is also where composition is kind of nice because that kind of gets into thumbnails and like if you thumbnail your pages, then obviously you'll know where everything is
Mm.
and like where you put it. So it's like
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So you'll have like the knowledge of the camera, but then you'll also have the knowledge of like how to make things visually pleasing once you've established your shots, if that makes sense.
That makes sense.
That's kind of how I learned when I took my brief comics class back in university. We talked a lot about camera, like literal camera. I don't remember them now. Like close up versus like wide shot versus establishing shot. I guess I do remember some of them. But like that kind of thing.
Yeah. But shout out to Rosalina who makes Division 5, and sometimes often in her Discord, um, she would draw. She would be essentially showing her the process of drawing the pages, and a lot of that was essentially just
Making
speech bubbles
layouts,
first. Yeah, making layouts, speech bubbles first, and then like very rough, like stick figures
thumbnailing.
of like where the characters is. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so I think like that allows her, and certainly was what she was commenting at the time, that allows her to be a little bit more dynamic with the paneling, and also to just make sure that like um you're not trying to very hard to squeeze speech bubbles or to squeeze text, and it gives her like a good idea of how users or readers are going to get through the panels as well. So
Exactly.
there's
And then
certainly it helps. Yeah.
yeah, and when you're thumbnailing, like it's always better to do thumbnails because if something works when it's small and you can read it, then it will work when it's bigger too. But if it isn't reading when it's small, then you're toast. And also simplicity is a huge one. Like if you're making a panel or a painting or like even when it comes to type, like typography, we can make a little example. They all follow like the same principle. Like if you're making like a cover for your comic and you have words. Oh my god, it's gonna get mad at me. Hold on, we're gonna actually never mind. It'll be fine. And then you have something like this, and it's way smaller. Automatically, the big one draws more attention, obviously. So if you're like arranging text for like a cover, like anything like that, and you want like one thing to stand out over the other, then like make it smaller, make it a different color. It kind of like applies to everything. Like all these little principles kind of work with everything, which is the nice part about composition is it's not like certain things only work for painting and certain things only work for comics. They all kind of go together. Yikes, that was too bright. That kind of stupid, whatever. Now we're gonna kind of talk about color a little bit. So this is kind of adjacent to composition, but like I know a lot of people struggle with moving color or moving from grayscale to color. I have the craziest technique, but it works. This is what I do, and you have to. I would not recommend this for comics. This is kind of more painting specific advice because this is crazy. What I do is I make like the most disgusting color combinations. This is great. You know what this would be good for actually? If you're working on comics, this would be good for like rough colors, like for your thumbnails. Because then it's kind of like a color script. If you've seen color scripts, I'll show you one later because I have an example. Actually, we can look at it now so that I can explain it. If you're just kidding, I'll just do it for you and then I'll show you the example after. Color scripts are, if you don't know, they're usually for movies, and it's basically where you take a bunch of key scenes from a movie or like an episode of a show or something, and you line them all up, and then you make color maps for each scene so that like the mood of the episode is where it's supposed to be. It's big, and like if you've ever thought about going to visual development for like movies or shows, or you see art like that on Twitter or like Instagram, you'll see them a lot where someone will have like a daytime scene and then a nighttime scene and then like sunset and like in between. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? That's like very much the sphere that I'm in art wise, so I see them all the time. Yikes, that's way too red. This is how I rough in colors, and this is why I like the color jitter. Because you can see like the little bits of variety already, even though it looks a little bit crazy. And this is like my process. You'll see it later, I'll show you. This is my process for like everything. Ooh. This is where I would leave like a sort of color key thing, especially if it's just like a thumbnail that's messy. So like here's like this one that's basically like the reference. I don't do any layer modes. Like this is just a normal layer, and I've just like brushed colors on top because it's so messy anyway that once I start actually painting it, I'm gonna go back through and fix it anyway. But like as far as like color and mood goes, like we can change this if we want it to be like a sunset, if we use like nice little peaches and oranges, it will feel very soft and warm and happy, right? This actually looks more like the morning. See, this is what I mean. You can change a lot with just the colors. And we'll make this kind of orange. Right, so this is already very romantic. It almost kind of looks like a fantasy scene versus like this one that's just like totally normal. So this is how I would approach it. And mood and like color will very much be dependent on like the context of your scene. Obviously, this is just a demo, so we weren't really aiming for anything specific. So it would depend on like whatever mood or like scene that you're working on already, which obviously if you're working on a comic, you know what's happening. So you could plan like the colors more accordingly. But that's basically how I would tackle it. I know some people like to use the color layer Whoa, that one looks cool. To me, this always looks like way too muddy and just like weird. So that's why I don't do it, because I know I'm gonna paint over all my stuff anyway. And then sometimes if I'm like, that looks pretty cool too. This is what I do, is I just like start combining a bunch of things. Like this one looks evil and scary. That's kind of cool. Yeah, it's very random. Like when I work with colors, it's very random. And I feel like you don't have to be tied down to a specific thing. I think the best way to do it is to just experiment and see what works best. But yeah, that's basically how I would tackle a composition study. Another good thing to do is those notan studies. Like if you're struggling, take your picture, turn it black and white, and then just like totally crank the curves. And then you can use these big pieces to start doing what we did earlier in grayscale. So it can be overwhelming at first, especially when you don't know like what to look for. And also if this grid is too scary to you, just do the rule of thirds. Like we can break this down. It's really easy and it doesn't have to be perfect. Like your lines don't have to be like perfectly split into thirds. You can kind of just eyeball it. I'm so bad at drawing straight lines. And then you can literally see, I just drew them really fast, but you can literally see nothing is hitting any of these important points, which is why we moved things around. We've got an area of interest here and we've got a little moment here. And then nothing is like directly in the middle, which is nice. So it's like that kind of thing. And then I just have some like examples of my work where you can see that I actually do this and I'm not just telling you to do this. So these were concepts I created. These are like basically what my thumbnails look like. And these are kind of nice examples because I have little characters in them actually. But you can see nothing is like, well, except for this one, but like, that's why we do thumbnails, because you have to spit out the bad ideas too. So these were a bunch of things I was going to do for my thesis project in school, and then I switched ideas. So this is like behind the scenes content that didn't get shown anywhere. But when I do thumbnails, I try to do like at least 15. And then these were just like other concepts. So you can tell like I did so many of these, and then I just scrapped them all. Rip. And then like you can see how I was experimenting with like different orientations of the canvas and like different sorts of layouts. This one wouldn't go with that one. Straight in the center. Got me. I don't even remember what this is, but more concepts. Here's kind of like a good example of that like S-curve thing from the Edgar Payne examples. You see it a lot in any like sort of painting that has like, or panel, I guess, that has like a road or like a river or something. They generally have this kind of curve, which is another word for it is like a leading line that like guides the viewer. This is kind of an example of the color keys. So for this, I wasn't sure what mood I wanted to go for, so I just did some random ones and called it. I didn't take this any further, so I can't show you what the finished piece turned out like because I was in the throes of university and then I had to change ideas, so yeah. Like, you can kinda see this one seems really spooky. This one is a little too soft, and I feel like it's not giving the right vibe. I don't know what's happening here. This one looks mysterious and, like, freaky. And then this one, I wanted to do, like, red and green. I remember because I was like, "How can I make this not blue?" So I was thinking about complementary colors, and it gave it this, like, really gross sunset vibe. I didn't like that one. This one was my favorite. I think this one gets the mood across the best. And then this is just another example of, like, things I've done for other people. So I was asked back in 2019, I think, to do guest art for Studio Heartbreak, which if you don't know them, they're like a little indie studio. So I made a bunch of thumbnails, and this is like a good example of how you can see I'm playing with the different compositions. Like here's a diagonal one. Most of them are pretty like center because it was like two characters. And then we narrowed it down to these three. And then eventually I was sending these to the people at Studio Heartbreak so that they could like decide since I was doing guest art for them, and they picked this one. And then it turned into this. So that's just like an example of like how these things evolve. Like you have to spit out 3 million weird ideas and then you just keep narrowing it down. And then this was a commission I did. This person was so nice. She let me do whatever I wanted. So that's why I don't have as many thumbnails for this one because she was super chill. And it was also right after Mermaid, so I was kind of dying. But these were like 4 basic thumbnails that I sent her. And then we decided on this one. So I started it in grayscale, which you can see. And this is like 80% done, is what I would call it. Because I had such a weird process when I was working on Mermaid stuff. So then I sent this to her and she approved it. And then it turned into the color version, which you can kind of see has slightly more detail. But that's pretty much how I tackle composition is I always do a thumbnail and then I clean them up based on like client feedback, or like if it's something that's just for you that you're working on, then it would obviously be your own preference. Or I guess if you wanted, you could ask people. I always think it's nice to ask people which ones they think look good because if I look at something for too long, then I feel like I start to lose like I can't find the errors as well. Or sometimes you just have to put something down and then pick it back up again. Like I'll start a painting and then I'll get like I guess 20% of the way through and then I have to put it down and not work on it for the rest of the day. Otherwise it will turn into like a disgusting mess. But that is basically my crash course on composition. Perfect timing, by the way, right at 3 o'clock. Um, does anyone have any questions? It can be about like my process or just like in general. Oh, palettes is smart. Color palettes is smart.
Doesn't seem like we have any questions. I think one of the biggest questions was that one earlier where we were talking about how does this apply to something like paneling in comics and manga.
A lot of it, I
Um,
feel like it's trial and error. Like you have to try things to know if it will look bad or not. Do you know what I mean?
mm,
Like you can't just like get it right on the first try. That's why we have like all these thumbnails. Even if it was just like thumbnails for pages, it's basically the same principle.
thumbnailing is important.
It's so important. It's also underrated. And people don't do enough thumbnails. Like if you're doing like 3 thumbnails, that's not enough. You need to spit out as many ideas as you possibly can, and when you finally run out, that's when you know you've done enough thumbnails. Obviously, when you've been painting for a long time, you don't have to do that as much. Case in point, I only did these 4. But like if you don't do enough thumbnails, you just won't have enough variety and you won't be able to see like what you could come up with. That was
Mm,
something that I like really learned in school is that I never used to do enough thumbnails. And obviously it depends on the project too.
yeah. I mean, I think obviously if you have like a character coming to speak to another character inside a panel. There's only so many ways you can do that. Right.
Yeah, for panels it's kind of different because it's like someone just said you can only do so many panels before it's like I need to move on to the next thing, which is why it depends on what you're working on. Like for example, if you're working on a new cover, you could definitely do like 15, 20 thumbnails for a cover because it's just one piece. But if it's like pages, I think the way I would tackle that is like the page as a whole, if that makes sense, like how the panels fit together on the page as a whole instead of like 15 individual thumbnails for each panel.
Do you use reference for thumbnailing too, or is it more out of your head and flow as you go on?
Usually I don't. Like for these, I didn't. For all of these Studio Heartbreak ones, I didn't use any references. And then for these, I didn't use any references for like any of these besides like, where is it? Like this one, because I don't know what the inside of a lighthouse looks like. So it kind of just depends. Most of them I kind of just make up because I'm thinking in terms of like big shapes rather than like what's actually happening. Like, I don't know what's going on here. Well, I do, but like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not super specific about things because you don't want to be lost in the details. It's just basically about like big shapes, which is kind of what we talked about earlier. Like, if it works from far away, then it will work when you turn it into a full piece. Which I think is also why it would be helpful to do page thumbnailing as like full spreads instead of individual panels. Because then, like, for example, if this was a comic, obviously these would be super boring panels because they're all square. But if we like change some of the sizes, oops, and like this was a panel, and then we had like, oops, I don't want that. Like if this was one big panel, and like you had like something like this kind of thing, right? So then you're looking at your page as a whole, and you can see like, are my panels flowing into each other the way I want the reader to follow them, or does it just look like a big mess? Right? Does that make sense? I wish I had my examples when I had to make comic pages for class. I don't know where they are. They're somewhere lost in my Google Drive. But mine were also really boring because the way I think about comics or like setting up scenes is very much in line with like movies and cinema, which is why a lot of these, where are they? We'll just look at this one. That's why a lot of my compositions are like very wide because I'm always thinking in terms of like the widescreen, like cinema type composition. I think actually for these, I referenced like this, whatever it is, 16, I think it's 16 by 9 or something like that. Something like that, like the movie screen size, because that's what I was going for. Yeah, like having the full spreads is really nice, and you can do a lot with like spreads. Like, and also, one thing we learned in our comics class is that like to take advantage of the page turn, which obviously doesn't work if it's digital, depending on, or I guess it will work for digital, just not for like scroll comics. You see it a lot in horror manga. Is they'll have like the page turn, and then it's like this crazy, freaky looking scene.
Page thumbnailing certainly saves a bit of time and also allows you to keep consistent on the
Yeah, and obviously
storytelling.
I have limited experience with like making full like comics, so I can only give you like my weird mix of painting and like comic knowledge. But
I
also
guess like one
maybe
of
it
the final
helps.
closing questions would be when are we going to see your post-apocalyptic girl manga?
This is what these are for. That was going to be my project. This is my little main character. I don't know when we're gonna see this.
Great.
Look, you can see my like little notes that I had, and then my professor was like, I don't understand what's happening. And I was like, okay, let me do something else. But yeah, Oh, look, here's this one. See, it was supposed to be really creepy and scary. That's why there's like dead fish and stuff. You can kind of see all my little. I take some when I thumbnail. I also take notes, which I
Enter
cut them out for
Lighthouse,
these.
Find Sword is incredible.
Thank you, dude. Sees wolf. It's like super basic, but like sometimes I scribble. I have a bad habit of scribbling, so I have to write notes so that I know what I'm looking at when I come back to it later. And then this was gonna be like one of my like big spreads for like my show or like my project.
Just on that, I would have picked up the added to my library.
Really?
Yes,
I don't know
that
where they
that
are. They're really? I guess
that
I
sword
have
is
to make it
amazing. Yeah,
now. Guess I have to make it.
that
I
that
had
sword is
like fake
incredible.
little thank you. I had like fake little mock, I guess, movie posters, but they were basically just like covers.
Mm.
And I was gonna put them in here, but I was like, it's not really relevant, so I didn't.
Well,
But
hopefully
yeah,
one
if
day
that's
we're gonna see that.
we'll see. I have no idea. I haven't worked on it in so long. I was rewriting the script, and then life happens.
Cool.
So funny the foreshadowing.
I guess like a closing one is I think, Tay, and correct me if I'm wrong. We still have a fifth.
We do. We are tackling texture next. Here's a little teaser. We're gonna
Texture.
talk about texture and things. I have a lot of it. I wonder. We'll give you a little teaser. Ignore my awful library. Didn't finish this, but like things like this, like how I go about picking. This is not finished, by the way. So this really is spoilers. Finding ways to balance like enough texture without overloading the viewer is basically what we'll be going over in the next lesson. Like these ones are a little crazy, but even this, I think, is
Yeah,
not
I
as
would say
insane
like
as it could be.
that's one of those examples where you can clearly tell it's glass. And you can
Yeah,
almost
exactly.
tell what the thickness of that glass as well. Um, I think
Let's
it's
go
one of
back to
those
it.
things that um, pretty much like even on that kind of texture, because of the color and the way that you overlay it, like you can see like, okay, where's the light coming from? These are gonna be like thicker part of the glass. Like if you look at the jar on the left, that border being like darker blue is just essentially gonna be like a circular, thicker border end of
Yeah.
that jar that's gonna be like thicker in glass. Um, it's one of those things that really you don't want to spend like a lot of time. It's at the very least in terms of comic and manga making, you don't want to spend a lot of time doing it. But if you do it and you do it tactfully, it just adds that extra bit of detail that makes it feel like it increases the immersion of the reader,
Yeah.
because they can more easily tell, um, what they're looking at, and what potentially it's made of, and things like that.
Yeah, texture is super underrated, I feel like. Especially when
Yep.
you do a lot
Yeah, I
of
would
digital
definitely say
art.
so. Yeah.
Because if you do a lot of digital art, sometimes you run into the problem where like everything looks super smooth and like shiny, like glossy. That used to be my like least favorite thing about my art. So we'll probably go over things like brushes and like how I think about brushes and textures because it's really weird.
But
Yeah,
there's a number of
there's
studies that you can do as well, which I'm fairly sure Taya will go through.
it's so fun.
Pick
Texture
up your
studies are
little
fun.
your cubes and your spheres, and then just make them like very different levels of
Different
um,
textures.
different
Look
textures
at
that you
all
can
that.
look at and practice, and yeah, and then go from there. And it will make um, your finished result better, for sure.
Just like more visually interesting. Like obviously these are pretty flat and don't have a lot of texture, but there's a little something going on in there.
I think
So you have to find like the right balance.
yeah, yeah. All right. Well, thanks everyone. We shall see you probably sometime
Next month.
early May.
Yeah.
Yep, for part 5, which is going to be around texture. That's going to be the final part. And then after that, we're going to have a small break for June, and then we're going to come back in July for Tony and Taea talk marketing and advertising yourself and your series, both across NamiComi, of course, but just
Just
across the
like in
wider web.
general.
Yeah, we do not live in a vacuum of just NamiComi stuff, of course, and so we're going to be looking at analytics, how you should be thinking about those things, and how you can look at what is happening across the places that you post,
And
and
what's
what
trending?
information are they giving you. Yeah, what's trending, what can you do about that as well. Can you take part of that, um, and jump on the trend before it's too late.
Before
we,
it
we
dies,
would
yeah.
know yeah, we would know a thing or two about that one, wouldn't we? So um, but yeah, we'll be going through that across July, and so yeah, look forward to that if you're interested in it. And yeah, in the meantime, thanks so much for joining us on this Saturday. Um, and yeah, we shall see you all next month and on YouTube probably as well.
Yeah.
All
Class
right.
dismissed.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.